Welcome to the Beyond Deadlines podcast, where we tackle challenges that schedule leaders come across on a day-to-day basis. My name is Greg Lawton, and I'm the CEO of an AI schedule management company.
And I'm Micah, a scheduling manager for Intel.
Each podcast is designed to give you strategies and tactics that you can implement right away. And today, we have a very special guest.
I'm Charlotte Candy. I'm Risk Director at ACOM UK.
Welcome, Charlotte. Lovely to have you here. So, today's challenge is for Charlotte, and here it is. You are the Director of Risk Management at a top 10 US contractor. The CFO wants to hold less contingency on the books so that they can report better numbers to the market. She's tasked you with figuring this out from a risk perspective. What do you do?
So, from my experience, the biggest cost to most contractors is putting money in for prolongation. So we need to understand how late are we going to be. This will have been done during the tender process, normally through a QSRA. That's a point in time. Things have moved on. Let's look at what we can change and what we can rerun. So looking at the prolongation costs. What risk drivers is there? What are the key things that are driving this lateness or extra money we need for if we are late as a contractor? And do we still need it? The first thing I would do.
Right. I'm going to break this up into a couple of areas. Let's imagine a scenario. Let's imagine two scenarios. The first scenario is it is February and the financial year end is in December. So she wants to have better numbers this year. And the second scenario is this is a 3-year master plan. So over the next 3 years, they want to increase their level of profitability. What would you do for number one? What would you do to decrease the contingency on the books or essentially spend less money in the year?
Okay, in the year, look at the activities that are driving it and try and mitigate it. Stop holding money just in case the risk happens, mitigate the risk, and then move that money into a different account. No longer hold it as contingency, have it as profit in the year.
Beautiful. Okay, so digging a bit deeper on that one, would you do this yourself, or would you ask the CFO? Let's imagine there's a risk team in place, but you're coming in as the new director of risk. Would you go in and do this yourself, as in it's a super high level skill, or would you train your team to do it, or would you expect them to do it, or would you instigate policies for the projects to do it themselves?
So, as a newcomer to this role, I would start off by actually leading by example and explain what is the process, what is the procedure, and why is the need for this. As it's QSRA, although in the UK it is a very common tactic to use when looking at risk management, it isn't as common in all industries and all geographical regions. So there would be an element of training that'd be required to understand whether the schedule quality was good enough, whether the risks were appropriate for this stage. It could be that the appetite when they were tendering was either too optimistic, or in this case, it sounds like quite pessimistic, maybe a lot of padding. So it would be a case of doing a lot of training to start with and bringing the whole organisation up to the methodology that you were trying to implement. It's not a silver bullet that will just solve your problems by one person imposing it on a business.
Can you jump in a little bit more for the person who works and lives in America? I had a good laugh when Greg mentioned that there was a risk team in place, and I'm like, no, there's not. But jump a little bit more into the tactics of how you would win over that organization in because just trainings aren't going to get there. Can you walk through some of how you turn the tide on a team and really get them to buy into risk?
Yeah, it's essentially the so what factor. Risk management, like any other process, it's a process. It's not going to fix everything. There has to be some benefit or something to take away. You always want to look good by saving money that you don't need to spend elsewhere. And if you can explain how you saved it, and we won't need to do this again in the future, 3 reasons to be really popular. It's really about demonstrating the benefits, saving money, time, actually being able to win more work because you are not spending as much money on the previous project.
And is there different people you would target in the organization first versus later?
As in to sort of win over with the risk management.
Yeah.
It sounds a bit cliched, but it's normally tone from the top, because if people don't buy into it at the top level, it's very different. It's very difficult for me to get it embedded in other levels. But the people who you really need are top level, and the people that are on the ground that are actually doing the day-to-day project management, because they will know their projects so much better than the risk team. And getting them on side is a case of not having risk management done to you. Is actually being part of the process and understanding the mechanisms to save time.
Wouldn't you do a little bit of carrot and stick here? Because in this situation, you've got the CFO.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in organizations where the CFO has just gone 5% everywhere. Give me it. And in this sense, you could have the CFO going, project costs reduced by X amount. Oh, and by the way, Mr. Project Director, you can do it however you wish. I don't care. But if you want to do risk, here is Charlotte and her team who can come in and help you find it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like a very strong suggestion, but you don't have to. Would that work in this sense?
In my experience, it's mixed. Because the easy option is I just take 5% off, I've solved my problem. But it's actually being able to explain the why. And that's where I feel the risk management team and professionals, that's where we add our value. We can explain to you why something has moved. Because it's very easy just to reduce costs by just cutting numbers. But it's the fact that we'd be able to explain the different confidence values. If you do X, this changes your position. And if you do Y, and so making the project teams understand that you understand their projects. You're not just there to pay lip service. You're trying to add value and make their lives easier.
Got it. Okay, let's flip the switch and let's imagine this is a big 3-year plan. Let's imagine the EBITDA margin, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization is 2%, and the CFO wants it to be 5%. And this is a big 3-year plan. And let's imagine that the contingency being put aside per year is 30% of the profit of the company. So it's a big proportion. Would you do anything differently than what you just said in a 3-year vision compared to a 1-year vision?
Yes. I would consider it as a portfolio, because I do very few construction companies are running one project at a time. So
Useful. Okay, can you tell me more?
So there'll be some high risk projects.
And
those ones you would expect probably needing to hold a higher level of contingency because you see them as riskier. If you're doing traditional projects that you've done, say you do one of these every year without fail, and you know it's like a replacement of light bulbs, for example, at an airport, you know what you're going to encounter. So then you can start making a risk-based decision to reduce your contingency values, because actually that's a low-risk activity. And if you've got a portfolio of some high-risk items, some medium-risk items, and some low-risk items, as a holistic view, it should start dropping. Obviously, we can't predict the future.
Yeah. How would you manage the CFO across this 3-year journey in terms of the regular updating, the progress, showing this as an effort that had a starting point and a finish point?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. It does. We do need to determine right at the beginning of the 3 years of what is our baseline, because without a baseline, I can't demonstrate whether I've actually made a difference or not.
You talking a portfolio baseline? So basically across all these projects, and this is the level, like we're holding X percentage of contingency across all these projects, and that's the baseline you're referring to. There's a lot of schedulers probably listening, and so they're probably immediately going, P6 baseline?
No. But the P6 baseline does have a role to play in this, because risk and cost and schedule are interdependent. But yes, we'd make sure we understood what the risk appetite was at the beginning, the baseline. And then we would have to have regular communication with the CFO about, well, this is a high risk project and these things have happened. Are you still happy with this position? Or if it stops being such a high risk thing, because actually it's something that's become a business as usual activity, are we happy enough to drop it down into a medium risk? I would recommend going straight down to a low risk activity. So just sort of making them understand the changes and considering external factors. We've had weather events. We have, well, in the UK, we have high inflation. We need to consider all of these factors when determining how to drop our contingency and whether it is
I get it.
an appropriate point to drop it.
So what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm using this to learn as well. What you're saying here is you need to establish all of the varying factors at the start. So assumptions about inflation, assumptions about cost of goods, and internal policies and procedures. Because if this is a contingency budget that a CFO is holding, that needs to be backed off against a finance policy. So there'll be a finance policy of holding a certain amount of contingency based on a certain calculation. So what you're essentially doing over time is amending that calculation. So there'll be an amendment of policy, all things being equal. So if all the assumptions hold. Then if I take that and flip it kind of, rather than looking up to the CFO, looking down, when does risk management become the job of a project manager as opposed to the job of a specialist risk manager? Because I hear this all the time. I've got my personal views, but I'd love to know your views.
So I'm going to use the cliche that every person on a project has the potential to be a risk manager. But project managers are busy people, and dependent on the scale of the project, that's when the specialists step in. We have the ability as risk professionals to be objective. We don't do we aren't necessarily involved in all the progress meetings and all the day-to-day politics, so we can take a standpoint of, okay, tell me more. It's really quite helpful that we can stand at the sidelines and be the project's conscience. And I think for the day-to-day risk management from the point of view of identifying risks, managing risks from a mitigation point of view, that is definitely the role of the project manager. But when it comes to dealing with quantitative analysis and doing some more of what is seen by a lot of people as the technical role, it is a risk manager's role, because we can take the viewpoints and we can check for cognitive bias and sort of, like I said, be the conscience, because we haven't got a vested interest in the success of the project. We want to help people, but the project manager has to be able to manage their project within the contingency that we help determine.
So I think the but that you included there is probably one of the most valuable things that project managers around the world need to hear, because I have heard the cliche all the time. Everyone has the capability to be a risk manager. Well, yes, I also have the capability to be a baker. Doesn't mean I'm going to. My job is project management. It's the exception in that, and the simple analogy I use in my head is every doctor has the ability to understand the heart, but when I need heart surgery, I go to a specific heart surgeon, because I'm not going to risk that the guy who's managed to practice hearts once in a 30-year career versus someone who's practiced hearts every single day for 30 years. And I look at risk management the same way, which is, yes, everyone on a day-to-day basis can do things that don't put the project at jeopardy and try and mitigate problems. But when you need the heart surgery, which is in this way, it's the quantitative analysis and it's the reverse viewpoint of what would I need to believe for this to be a failure, as opposed to what would I need to believe for this to be a success, and then convince myself of that. That's where I'd pull in the specialist. Have I
Yep.
said that correctly?
I think so, but I'm biased.
I'm just using it as a learning point. I'm learning here.
One question I had on this 3-year journey you'd be going on, what sort of levers do you usually pull to increase your optimization or make the process of risk just better overall? And where are you looking to add technology, or when you're looking at portfolio, being able to just, I fix this one problem, it fixes this on 6 or 7 projects. How do you look at that across the 3-year journey?
No, that's a difficult one. It's not easy. You start using data for trends, and the data is really important when you're going over a 3-year period to start looking for similarities between projects, between programs. Have we aggregated any data up to portfolio level? And whilst aggregating data is great, we can start creating some biases of that's actually not what happens when the data all groups together. And then we disaggregate it to make sure we've got the right information going in. But we do use tools. We have quantitative modelling tools. From a cost point of view, it's very easy to aggregate up to a programme or portfolio. From a schedule point of view, it becomes a little bit more challenging because of all the interdependencies. So that does require a lot more checks. So what I'd normally do with these sort of things is normally review them on a quarterly basis. This would not be an annual task, because otherwise we don't understand the history of how we've got where we've got to.
So when general contractors go to bid work, they'll add an overhead rate to the rates of individual trades and equipment. And that overhead rate is essentially to pay for the head office and to pay for what I like to call insurance. And it's inside insurance. So if the project goes west, it's the centre and the treasury that are going to fork out the pot. So with this in mind, I've always held a view that portfolio offices are actually more similar to insurance companies like Geico than they are to the underlying construction projects that they own. So at that level, at the portfolio level, are you running any kind of statistical insurance analysis to see what the head office insurance rate should be across these projects?
I personally haven't, but I can see why it needs to be. It's just very difficult to get all the data together at portfolio level to actually start truly seeing how big the problem is or how much insurance you need. But it's an area probably for development.
What data would we need to get, or what would we need to believe for that to be easy to do?
I think we'd need cost estimates that are actually reflective of reality. We'd need schedules that are also without flow, without any of the elements in that are like buffers, so that we can understand what's truly in there. And then I am known to model at portfolio level risk. It's just that they're a lot higher level risk and a lot more generic. And if you had all those 3 items, I think you'd start getting to a position, but it's about the quality when you start going to such large amounts of data.
Yeah, I can imagine. So this is where insurance industries like car insurance differ from projects, in that you've got such a large volume of cars and they're isolated components, so that one car isn't the value of 50% of the market. Whereas projects, you can have a single project which is 50% the value of an entire portfolio. So that level of insurance analysis doesn't make sense. It's more of a cross my fingers and hope I don't have to pull on a surety provider.
Let's cross our fingers.
I have a Bentley and a Honda Civic in my driveway, so that actually is my insurance policy, because Bentley's pretty expensive and the Honda Civic's not. So
yeah.
Do you actually have a Bentley?
No, absolutely not. This podcast
I'm just
checking.
I'm just checking that.
I was impressed.
Yeah, no. I have 3 small children. I have 3 car seats. Never mind. We won't get into that here.
Right. So pulling it full circle on this. So we've talked about a 1 year horizon, a 3 year horizon, and you actually mentioned some things around. I wanted to say a 4-box model, but you didn't say that exactly. Around on one axis you've got risk of project, and on the other axis you've got importance of project to that level of contingency pot. And you also mentioned about where you'd bring in a risk manager, in as opposed to everyone's a risk manager on a day-to-day basis. A final element. Let's say that you got to the end of this 3-year journey, and it's been a success, and you've increased the EBITDA margin from 2 to 5%, all things being equal. And the CFO says, "What's next?" What would you tell her?
Oh no. So success is great, but we need to learn what we did and how we're going to take that forward. So that was over a 3-year period. Check all the variables.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of projects at the moment are saying, "Oh, could you provide me any data on X, Y, and Z?" I can't at the moment. The last 5 years is not a great data set for weather, utilisation, because of we've had Brexit, we've had COVID, we've got hyperinflation. There's no baseline yet for that data set. So maybe that's a case of we need to tweak this model. What went well, we continue to do. What didn't go well, we work out how we can do this differently, if we can. Because it could be one of those factors I've just described, completely out of anyone's control. And once you've got, I would say you'd need a minimum of probably 3 cycles before you'd actually work out what the optimum method is of managing this. So usually it's a period. I'm going for a 7-year period. If something's changed during 7 years, every year we've got a problem. If it stays the same, that's our cycle, and we go on to the next 7-year cycle. So
you've just triggered a thought in me that makes complete sense, which actually I'll pull from sales management, which is qualification theory. So essentially what I can imagine is after you've got to the end of a cycle, you might not have your 7-year cycle of data, but you'll probably have enough data to understand which projects you should be bidding and which you shouldn't. And actually how you take this forward could be that you don't use the same bidding strategy that you've used previously. You become a specialist in certain areas in which you know you can manage the risk profile. And then over the 7-year period, I would imagine that you would get more and more evidence of how deep that qualification could go, and or become specialists at managing some specific risks. So I know that in the market, there are specific providers that specialize in things like piping elements of projects for oil and gas, and they only do piping elements of projects. And I would imagine it might be because of something like this.
Yeah. They've, over a period of time, they've realised they're high-risk projects. Why are they doing them? If they're doing for prestige, they may continue to do it. If it is eroding their profit margins, that's time to exit that market. But using a risk-based approach to their contingency to understand what is good for their business model and what isn't.
Got it. Okay. Well, we're running out of time now. So, Charlotte, any final thoughts that you would want to share with the listeners?
No, that's a hard question. I think it is about the value of managing risk as a portfolio instead of in silos.
So you'd say to people, you should be thinking about risk management in these large contractor organization or client organizations as a portfolio over a period of time, as opposed to just a process on a monthly basis, on a per project basis.
Yeah, to get true value from risk management, it needs to be a holistic view, not a one-off.
Wonderful. And I'm going to take with me the but you mentioned before, because I'm going to learn that one. I think that was great. Okay, then with that, I'd like to thank Charlotte for coming on the podcast and giving us her views. And as always, have a great rest of your day.